Hello, welcome back to my haunted library. It's Regina, and I'm here today to finally, after over 2 years, get to the end of Story by Robert McKee. Now, it's not because the book is that long or dense, although it is both. It is because I've just been dragging my behind on this playlist, but I finally am ready to do the last. I'm going to combine the last couple of chapters just because they're short, and I'm ready to get to the end. I think it was last winter. Before the world changed, I was at Robert McKee's story seminar in New York. He'd had different seminars on genre, and I did horror. And I got another book by him, which I have not read yet, called, here we go, Dialogue. And he signed it. He wrote, Write the Truth, Robert McKee. So when I'm done with this, I'm going to move on to this, and I'll probably do a playlist on dialogue. Now remember, this is for screenwriting, and although I have written screenplays, that's how I started out. I'm mostly focused on novel and short story writing now, but so many of the principles can apply to both screenplays and fiction. I really wish he would write a book on fiction. I think that would be amazing. All right, let's get to the last couple of chapters. All right, so right off the bat, his first bullet point is dialogue is not conversation. So in other words, there should be no wasted words. In screen dialogue, as in fiction, you don't want wasted words. Like you don't want to have a lot of, hey, how are you? Oh, I'm fine. Unless there's all kinds of subtext going on beneath that. So let's say you have a recently divorced couple run into each other at a party, and each one of them is there with a different date. Or maybe the woman, let's say, has got like a young stud with her. I'm only saying that because usually in the scene it would be like the pathetic older wife and the husband with the young studs, or the young, not a stud, well, you never know. But I think you know what I'm saying. And they have a tense conversation at the bar. Hi, how are you? Fine, how are you? Then we have a subtext going on. So what they're saying is not what they're saying. So that's when people advise not to write dialogue that's on the nose. That's what they're talking about. First, screen dialogue requires compression and economy. Screen dialogue must say the maximum in the fewest possible words. Second, it must have direction. Okay, so that's very specific. Third, it must have purpose. Each line or exchange of dialogue executes a step in design that builds and arcs the scene around its turning point. He talks a lot in this book about turning point. It's very important. All this precision, yet it must sound like talk, using an informal and natural vocabulary complete with contraction slang, even if necessary, profanity. Speak as common people do, Aristotle advised, but think as wise men do. I love how he always goes back to Aristotle's Poetics, which was the first book ever written on storycraft. Remember, film is not a novel. Dialogue is spoken and gone. If words aren't grasped the instant they leave the actor's mouth, annoyed people suddenly whisper, what did they say? Oh gosh, I remember when I was in college, a friend of mine and I went to see Apocalypse Now, and I had already seen it. That movie came out when I was probably in high school, and I took her to see this because I really was a big fan of this movie, and I don't know if I could stomach that movie now. It's pretty brutal. But the scene when the captain of the boat, I think he's called Chief, when he gets impaled by the spear, I think it comes out from behind him, right before everything goes haywire near the end, and he's blood spurting out of his mouth, and he looks at Willard and says, he looks down, he looks at Willard and he says, a spear. And then he collapses, and then he tries to pull Willard's head down on top of the spear. Well, that's a very dramatic part in the film, so sorry for giving that part away if you've never seen it. But like the entire movie theater is like gasping, because he was actually one of my favorite characters. So when he dies, you're just like, and then he says, a spear. And my friend who was with me was like, what did he say? And I was like, he said a spear. I just was so annoyed. I mean, I think I would have more of a sense of humor about that kind of stuff now, but at that time I was so deadly serious about film. I was the girl in the black beret, smoking the clove cigarette in the balcony. So I'm sure you can imagine that. All right, so what else? Dialogue doesn't require complete sentences. We don't always bother with a noun or a verb. Never write anything that calls attention to itself as dialogue. Anything that jumps off the page and shouts, "Oh, what a clever line am I?" Which is precisely my problem with Quentin Tarantino. Now, I know it's an unpopular opinion. I'm not denying that he is a very talented man, an incredibly gifted filmmaker, and who changed the genre in a lot of ways. So I give him his due. I think he's so much in love with his dialogue that it really shows, and there's just something obnoxious about him. But that doesn't mean I don't think he's worthy of praise, if that makes sense. Just not my taste. All right, short speeches. He talks about short speeches. If it's going to be a long speech, it has to have a lot of meaning and has to be there for a reason. Like, he uses Salieri's Confession in Amadeus, which of course is a great movie, a great speech about how God gave him the desire but not the talent. I was thinking of Gordon Gekko's famous speech in Wall Street. Wall Street's a great movie that I've revisited, a few years ago. Every few years I'll revisit that movie. I think it's really quite amazing. And that scene, it's not as long as you think it is. He basically just says greed is good, greed is right, and he has a few other lines. It feels like a much longer speech because it has a lot of impact. In ill-written dialogue, useless words, especially prepositional phrases, float to the ends of sentences. So he's talking about, like in life, we cut each other off. If you listen to real conversations, especially with certain people, they're always cutting you off. So you got to get your words out really fast because they're not listening to you. They're thinking about what they want to say, and they're waiting for you to take a breath so they can jump in. I think we've all met a few people like that. The best advice for writing film dialogue is don't. Never write a line of dialogue when you can create a visual expression. One of my favorite examples, and I know I've mentioned this one before because it's so good, of show don't tell and introducing a character by really showing you what that character is all about without telling, is the opening shot of Paper Moon. Very desolate prairie. It's like in Arkansas or Oklahoma or something. And there's a funeral going on, and the little girl's there. Her mother's dead. You don't know this, but she's like the only mourner with like two other people. So a sparsely attended funeral, which is already telling you a lot about the character. And then Ryan O'Neal's character comes ambling through the cemetery. He pauses for a second to pick up a bouquet of flowers on somebody else's grave, and then goes to this funeral where the little girl is and puts the flowers down. So it tells you everything you need to know about that character. I think that's just a great example of great filmmaking. You hear this show don't tell a lot and it becomes a bit of a cliche, and it's like, well, what does that really mean? Well, that's what it means. Alfred Hitchcock once remarked, when the screenplay has been written and the dialogue has been added, we're ready to shoot. He, of course, was an extremely visual filmmaker and storyboarded everything. He gives an example here, again, that could apply to writing a novel. Or instead of writing in your screenplay or in your novel, he's been sitting there for a long time. How do you show that? He stubs out his 10th cigarette. That's specific. That's good writing versus he's been sitting there for a long time. When you're writing, try to get away from the generalizations like that. Like, well, you want to convey he's been sitting there for a long time, but how do you do it with an image? This is something you should avoid in your fiction writing as well, and I've been guilty of this. A typical line of non-description. He starts to move slowly across the room. How many times have we written that and been like, I know that's wrong? He begins to. I think that should be cut from your writing. I've been cutting it from my writing. So instead of he moves slowly across the room, maybe he ambles, strolls, moseys, saunters, drags himself, staggers, waltzes, glides, lumbers, tiptoes, creeps, slouches, shuffles, waddles. You get the idea. And eliminate is and are. There is a big house on a hill above a small town is not a vivid description, but a mansion guards the headlands above the village is. It's very specific. So then he goes on to image systems, the screenwriter as poet. So he talks about and this is very specific to screenwriting, but it's also applies to novel writing, about each image is important. So you're not just describing a bland, generic living room. When you have a chance in that even brief description to tell us something about that character, how that person lives. An image system is a strategy of motifs, a category of imagery embedded in the film that repeats in sight and sound from beginning to end with persistence and great variation, but equally great subtlety, as a subliminal communication to increase the depth and complexity of aesthetic emotion. Did you catch that? Basically, it means like we're reading these images visually in a film or in reading a book. We're not consciously aware, but we're getting information. That's what's filling out the experience. That's why it's so important to do it well and not generically. And then he spends a couple pages on one of my favorite films, which is Les Diaboliques, and it's a French film about two women who work at a school, and the one is married to this complete bastard sadist wife beater, and the other woman is a teacher at the school, is having an affair with him. And he's such a bastard, and he treats them both so horribly, they decide that they're going to kill him. If you've never seen this film, you must see it. It's been remade a couple times. In fact, the first time I saw this movie, I didn't see the original. I saw a TV movie of the week version of it, like in the 70s, starring Tuesday Weld. And that is really good. It really is good. And that movie freaked me out. And what freaked me out is exactly the kind of imagery that McKee is talking about in this book. It's all about water imagery. There's a sense of water everywhere. In the original French film, the first image is like a car going through a mud puddle. So we're just inundated with this water imagery, the dripping faucet. Examples of imagery, he goes back to one of his favorite films, Chinatown, which is a great movie. And if you watch that film, Polanski does use a lot of windows, rearview mirrors, eyeglasses, broken glass, broken spectacles, cameras. If you've seen the movie, you know at the end what happens with an eye. That's all I have to say. So all of this is symbolic references that you're not consciously aware of, but you are picking up on, and it makes that climax that much more powerful. All right, so while I was going off on a major tangent about French film, my phone battery died. So let me just kind of wrap this up because I talked a lot. So his last chapter is called A Writer's Method. There are two ways to write. The writing, according to McKee, writing from the outside in or the inside out. So he recommends the latter, writing from the inside out. And then his last chapter is called Fade Out. It's like a little afterword. And I'm not going to read everything he wrote, but he gives a little parable of a story that his father used to tell him. I've got a little tear in my eye at the end because, I've been through this journey with Robert McKee. And when I met him in person, I have to admit I was a bit starstruck. I got a chance to ask him a question. I sat down at a table with him. He did look a little tired when I approached. I was like, I hope, I'm not tiring him out here. But I had asked him about comedy in horror, like funny horror. And he then actually took that tangent and spoke about that in the next lecture. So I felt pretty good about that. But yeah, I am a little bit starstruck. But so this is what he says at the end, his final statement. Write every day, line by line, page by page, hour by hour. Keep story at hand, which I have. Use what you learned from it as a guide until command of its principles become as natural as the talent you were born with. Do not do this despite fear. So he acknowledges that fear is a big part of the process. For above all else, beyond imagination and skill, what the world asks of you is courage. Courage to risk rejection, ridicule, and failure. As you follow the quest for stories told with meaning and beauty, study thoughtfully, but write boldly. Then, like the hero of the fable, your dance will dazzle the world. I love how it ends on an inspiring note. So that is the end of my playlist. And for those of you who have been here for the long haul, thank you so much. And sorry it took so long. So let me know in the comments below if you read McKee's story. What do you think of some of the ideas in it? Do you agree, disagree? Do you have any other craft books that you highly recommend for fiction writing or screenwriting or whatever it is? I would love to hear your thoughts. So that's all I have for today. Thanks for stopping by my haunted library, and I'll see you soon. Bye!